At my sister's wedding, during her big speech, the one right after cutting the cake and thanking everyone for coming, she looked out at the crowd with a wine glass in her hand and a wide smile and said, "I just hope I never end up like my single, lonely sister." She laughed. The crowd laughed with her. Even my mother nodded like it was something charming or expected. I sat there holding a fork in one hand and my daughter Ivy's tiny fingers in the other, trying to pretend it didn't sting, trying not to cry in front of 120 people, trying to keep my face calm like it didn't matter that my sister had just turned my entire life into the punchline of her speech, that she had reduced me to a cautionary tale. I looked around the reception hall, which was glowing with white lanterns and eucalyptus garlands. Everyone was smiling. Some people were whispering. I felt the same heat crawl up my chest that I used to feel in middle school when the popular girls would pretend to be friendly just to laugh at what I was wearing. Only now I was 34. I was a mother, and it was my own sister doing the laughing. Ivy tugged my hand and leaned closer. "Why are they laughing at you, Mommy?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were serious. She's only 7, but she sees everything. I gave her a tight smile and said, "It's nothing, baby." But my throat felt like it was closing. Camille didn't stop. She went on about finding the right person and not settling for a life of quiet desperation and frozen dinners. She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. I had told myself I would show up, smile, clap, and go home, that I wouldn't let the little comments get to me. I didn't expect a tribute, but I definitely didn't expect to be humiliated, and I never imagined what would happen next, because just when I thought I would have to swallow the shame and survive the night like I always do, Ivy let go of my hand, pushed her chair back, and climbed up onto it like it was a stage. Her little white sneakers squeaked against the wood. She raised her voice just loud enough for everyone to hear and said, "Auntie?" The room turned toward her. Camille blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, sweetheart," she answered with a forced chuckle. Then Ivy said, "Mommy might be alone, but she's not fake." The room went silent, like completely still. You could hear the air conditioner humming. You could hear forks pause mid-air. You could feel the shift in the room like the air had dropped 20 degrees. Camille's smile froze. Gloria, my mother, sat up straighter and stared at Ivy like she didn't know what to say. A few people looked down at their napkins. No one laughed. I reached out to bring Ivy down, but she stayed standing. "She's not lonely," she added. "She reads with me every night and kisses me every morning, and she works really hard so I can go to school and eat lunch with heart-shaped notes in it." And just like that, the room that had turned me into a joke became quiet with something else, something heavier, something real. I felt tears rush to my eyes, but I didn't cry because I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I was proud. Not because I had anything to prove, but because my daughter already saw the truth, and she wasn't afraid to say it out loud. That moment changed everything. I didn't always feel invisible. There was a time when my family saw me as more than just the older sister who couldn't get it together. Before I got divorced, before I moved back home, before everything about me started to feel like an inconvenience. My name is Lena Avery. I'm 34. I work 2 part-time jobs, go to night classes twice a week, and raise a 7-year-old daughter who thinks I hung the moon. My life isn't glamorous. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet Oregon suburb, 5 miles from the same house I grew up in. The rent is manageable, and the neighbors know Ivy's name. We don't have a lot, but we have peace. I fight every day to keep it. My sister Camille and I used to be close. When we were little, we shared a room with bunk beds and used to choreograph fake music videos with a hairbrush and a flashlight. She was always the prettier one, the funnier one, the one teachers liked more. I never minded. I just thought we were different. She loved crowds. I loved quiet. She was prom queen. I was yearbook editor. We had our own lanes and we stayed in them. But things shifted as we got older. Camille graduated college, got a job in marketing, and moved to Los Angeles. I got married young, had Ivy at 27, and found myself single 3 years later with a child and no roadmap. When my ex-husband left, Camille sent a sympathy card. It said, "Hang in there, you're strong." I appreciated the gesture, but it felt more like a formality than real comfort. My mom, Gloria, didn't take sides during the divorce. At least that's what she said. In practice, she asked questions like, "Do you think you were just too emotional?" Or, "Have you thought about how this might look to Ivy in the long run?" My dad, Malcolm, stayed quiet. That's what he does best. He folds into the background, the same way he did during arguments growing up. He believes silence is peace, but it often feels like abandonment. For a while, I tried not to lean on them. I didn't want to be the burden. I got a job at a local bakery in the mornings and cleaned offices in the evenings. I took Ivy to school, packed her lunches, read every permission slip. At night, I studied marketing from a laptop covered in stickers she picked out. Ivy is the reason I keep moving. She's the reason I didn't give up. So when the wedding invitation arrived, printed in gold script with floral trim, I knew exactly what it represented. Not just a celebration of love, but a reminder that Camille's life was continuing to shine in the spotlight while mine was expected to stay in the audience. I RSVP'd this, not because I wanted to go, but because I didn't want to give them another reason to think I was bitter. I helped Ivy pick out her dress, light blue with tiny embroidered daisies. She looked like a spring morning. I wore a deep green wrap dress I borrowed from a friend. It wasn't new, but it made me feel elegant. That morning, I told myself we would go, be gracious, clap at the right times, and leave early. I knew there would be tension, but I was used to being the quiet one in the room. Camille barely acknowledged me when I arrived. She was surrounded by her friends, sun-kissed, sharp-tongued women in coordinated dresses and champagne curls. They spoke in fast, polished voices, and I could feel the distance between us stretch even wider. One of them looked me over and said, "You're Camille's sister? You look so grounded." I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. Gloria greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She bent down to hug Ivy and said, "You're such a lucky girl to have an aunt like Camille." Then she stood up and looked at me. "Try to enjoy the night, Lena. Don't overthink things." During the ceremony, Camille looked radiant. I'll give her that. Her husband, Noah, seemed genuinely kind. He cried when she walked down the aisle. People clapped like it was a movie ending, and for a moment I believed I could sit through this whole day with grace. But at the reception, the cracks started to show. Camille didn't include me in the bridal party photos. She gave a bridesmaid's toast before I had even spoken to her once, and Gloria kept reminding Ivy to sit still and behave, like she didn't trust her not to ruin the aesthetic. Still, I stayed calm. I kept Ivy close. I let them take their pictures, pass their judgment, do what they needed to feel superior. I told myself that I would leave with my head held high. I had survived harder things, but I wasn't prepared for what Camille said during that speech. I wasn't ready for how easily she made me the punchline. I had come expecting to be overlooked. I didn't expect to be mocked. And I definitely didn't expect the one person who would stand up for me to be the smallest voice in the room. But that's what happened. And that's where everything started to change. The reception hall was beautiful. White roses twisted around the columns. Flickering candles lined every table, and a string quartet played softly under the twinkle of fairy lights. People were laughing, clinking glasses, and dancing like they belonged in a movie. Everything looked perfect on the outside, but I could feel it. Something quiet and sharp just beneath the surface. That feeling of being somewhere you were invited, but not truly welcomed. Camille barely looked in my direction. Not once did she introduce me to anyone. She floated from guest to guest, all charm and sparkle, the perfect bride in her off-shoulder gown and cathedral veil. People praised her like she had built the wedding with her own hands. "You really do have it all," one of her bridesmaids said while holding a mimosa. Camille smiled and said, "Well, I planned this day down to the minute. I don't like surprises." That was a lie. Camille loved surprises, as long as she was the one delivering them, as long as she controlled the story. I was just the subplot, the older sister who never quite measured up, never quite fit into the life she crafted. I sat at a table near the back, next to the DJ booth, close enough to hear the music, far enough that it felt deliberate. Ivy sat beside me in her blue dress, swinging her feet under the chair. She had a little paper butterfly clipped into her curls and was quietly coloring in the kids' menu with a pink crayon. At one point, Gloria came by and straightened Ivy's napkin. "Try to keep her calm during the speeches," she said, not even looking at me. "Let's not have any interruptions." Then she walked away before I could respond. The slideshow started next. Pictures of Camille and Noah traveling, hugging, dancing at festivals. Then baby photos of Camille flashed on the screen. Camille on a tricycle, Camille in a tutu, Camille blowing out candles with cake on her cheeks. I wasn't in a single frame. My chest tightened, but I told myself it didn't matter. That this was her day and I was just there to support. I kept my smile steady. I helped Ivy cut her chicken and made sure she drank her apple juice. I held it all together until the microphone was handed to Camille. She stood under the chandelier with her wine glass raised and her smile wide. Her voice carried perfectly across the room. People leaned in, expecting a romantic speech about love and destiny. And that's how she began. She thanked Noah, her forever person, and their parents for helping her become who she was. Then she turned to the crowd and said, "And thank you all for being here tonight. We feel so lucky to be surrounded by couples who show us what real commitment looks like." There were some warm laughs and applause. Then she kept going. "I've always said," Camille added, tilting her head, "that marriage is about timing, finding the right person at the right time and not wasting your life waiting for something that may never come." A few people chuckled. She looked straight at me and smiled. "I just hope," she said slowly, clearly, "I never end up like my single, lonely sister, raising a kid with no husband and no real plan." Laughter erupted from every corner of the room. It wasn't a polite laugh. It wasn't nervous or confused. It was genuine amusement, as if she had delivered the perfect punchline. People clapped. One of the groomsmen even whistled. I froze. I didn't laugh. I didn't blink. My entire body went cold like someone had poured ice water down my spine. I stared at Camille. She looked so pleased with herself. Her eyes sparkled like she had just won a game no one else knew they were playing. I looked at my mother. Gloria was nodding, not laughing but not disturbed either. She looked proud, like Camille had made a clever observation. My father sat with his hands folded in his lap, face unreadable, like always. Ivy tugged on my arm and leaned close. "Why are they laughing at you?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it pierced straight through me. I turned to her and tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't cooperate. I managed to whisper, "They're not. It's just a joke." But even Ivy could tell I didn't believe that. Camille raised her glass again, still smiling. "To finding the right person before it's too late." More clapping, more laughter. My vision blurred. My throat felt tight. I looked at the exit door and seriously considered grabbing Ivy and walking out. But then what? What message would that send to her? That it was okay to let people humiliate you if they do it with a smile? That the only way to survive is to stay quiet? I felt Ivy rest her head against my arm. She wasn't coloring anymore. She wasn't eating. She was watching me, her eyes big and worried. And in that moment, something inside me cracked open. I had taken a lot over the years. From my ex-husband, from my mother's quiet judgment, from strangers who looked down on a single mom with tired eyes and cheap shoes. But somehow, this hurt the most. Not because it was public, but because it was family. Because Camille, who used to braid my hair and share her secrets, had now chosen to use me as entertainment. And the people who claimed to love me had laughed along. I didn't know it yet, but the person who would respond, the one who would change everything, wasn't me. It was Ivy. She was about to remind me and everyone else in that room exactly who I was. Ivy stood up, not in a dramatic way, not like she was about to give a speech. She simply placed both hands on the table, pushed her chair back, and climbed on top of it. Her little feet made soft thuds as they settled on the seat cushion. Her knees wobbled slightly, but she stood tall, her chin lifted. At first, I didn't even notice. I was still staring at my empty plate, willing myself not to cry. I was swallowing everything I wanted to scream. I didn't want to ruin Camille's perfect night, even though she had just taken everything sacred about mine and made it a public joke. Then I heard Ivy's voice. "Auntie?" She didn't shout. She didn't tremble. She just said it loud enough for everyone around us to hear. I looked up and saw her standing there, dress fluttering around her legs, cheeks flushed from the heat and the moment. Her hands were at her sides, clenched into tiny fists. Camille turned slowly, clearly caught off guard. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied. Her voice was sweet, but her smile looked tight. I felt my heart start to pound. I reached out instinctively, but Ivy didn't look at me. Her eyes were locked on Camille, and her next words came out like a clear, ringing bell. "Mommy might be alone," she said, "but she's not fake." The room froze. There were no giggles this time, no whispers, just the sound of forks being set down and glasses not quite making it back to the table. Camille's lips parted slightly. Her eyes flickered like she was trying to figure out whether to laugh it off or pretend she hadn't heard it. "She's not lonely," Ivy continued, her voice stronger now. "She works really hard. She tucks me in every night and sings songs she makes up. She lets me help cook even when I make a mess. She doesn't have a husband, but she has me." I wanted to pull her down. I wanted to whisper that it was okay, that she didn't have to protect me. But something inside told me to let her finish, to let her stand in that moment, because she was speaking not just for me, but for every time I had been too exhausted or too afraid to speak for myself. "She writes little notes in my lunch," Ivy said, "with hearts and smiley faces, and she always shows up, even when she's tired or has work. She always shows up." Camille's smile had completely vanished. Her posture stiffened. A few people in the crowd looked toward me, then back to Ivy. There was no laughter now, only silence. I slowly stood beside her, placing a steady hand on her back, not to stop her, but to let her know she wasn't alone. She glanced down at me briefly and then back at the crowd. "Mommy's my favorite person," she said, "so please don't laugh at her again." That's when the silence broke. It started with a soft gasp from someone across the room, then a quiet, almost guilty clap, then another. Before long, several people were clapping, unsure of whether it was allowed but needing to do something. It wasn't loud, and it didn't last long, but it was enough. Ivy looked up at me with eyes wide and searching, like she wasn't sure what she had just done. I lifted her down from the chair gently, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded once and leaned into my shoulder. Across the room, Camille adjusted her veil and took a sip of wine. She didn't say another word. The DJ restarted the music a little too quickly, and people shifted in their seats, trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a child cut through the noise with more honesty than most adults ever dare to. I carried Ivy outside for some air. The late afternoon sun had begun to fade, casting long shadows over the courtyard. The wind played with the hem of my dress as I sat on a stone bench and held her close. "I didn't like what she said," Ivy mumbled into my neck. "It was mean." "I know, baby," I said. "You were really brave. She shouldn't make you sad. You do everything." I closed my eyes and held her tighter. I didn't need to explain to her what it means to be underestimated, dismissed, or seen as incomplete. She already understood enough. And in that moment, I realized that all the things people couldn't see about me, how hard I worked, how deeply I loved, how much I carried without complaining, were seen perfectly by the one person who mattered most. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel lesser. I felt proud. Not because of a title or a ring or a place in the family pecking order, but because of the life I had built quietly and fully with my own two hands. That night, Ivy reminded me who I was, and she reminded everyone else in that room who I had always been. I wasn't the story Camille wanted to tell, but I was the one that needed to be heard. After a few minutes outside, I stood up from the stone bench and walked back into the reception hall with Ivy in my arms. I expected people to avoid my eyes. I thought they would be embarrassed by what had happened. Instead, something unexpected unfolded. People looked at me differently. They didn't stare or whisper. They nodded. One older woman I didn't recognize from Camille's side caught my eye as I passed by and said, "Your daughter's amazing." A man at a nearby table gave me a quiet thumbs up as I returned to my seat. Even one of Camille's bridesmaids, Sophie, the one with the pixie cut, reached out and gently touched my arm as I passed. "That was a moment," she said. "A good one." I sat down slowly, placing Ivy next to me again. She immediately picked up her crayon and returned to her drawing like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just turned a 100-person wedding reception into a stage for truth. Camille stood near the dance floor, surrounded by her bridesmaids, her back to the crowd. Her posture was stiff, her movements quick and tight. She was whispering something to her maid of honor, who glanced nervously in my direction before nodding. Then Camille turned and walked toward me. I expected an apology. Maybe a fake one, the kind people give when they're backed into a corner. But when she reached my table, She didn't sit or kneel or lower her voice. She just stood there. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "your daughter definitely knows how to command a room." I looked up at her. My expression stayed calm, but I didn't smile. She spoke from the heart. Camille gave a half shrug. "It was a joke, Lena. People laughed. That's kind of the point of a wedding toast." "I wasn't laughing," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Come on, don't take everything so personally. It's not always about you." I stood up then. Not angrily, not to make a scene, just to meet her at eye level. I looked her straight in the face, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel smaller than her. I didn't feel older or sadder or messier. I felt honest. "You said I was lonely," I told her. "You said it in front of everyone and you wanted them to laugh. But I'm not lonely. I'm raising a human being who sees me, who knows who I am, and who stands up for me when the people who are supposed to love me the most tear me down." Camille shifted uncomfortably. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. Her mouth opened slightly like she had a retort on the tip of her tongue, but she couldn't quite reach it. Behind her, one of her friends called out that the first dance was about to start. Camille gave a tight smile and nodded, then turned away. She didn't apologize. But for once, I didn't need her to, because something had already shifted, not in her, but in me. When the music started and she walked toward the dance floor, I sat back down next to Ivy. She looked up at me. "Is it over?" she asked. "Almost," I said. "You okay?" She nodded. "Can I have cake now?" I laughed, for real this time. "Absolutely." The waiter came by with plates of vanilla wedding cake and coffee. People were moving on, talking again, but the atmosphere had changed. It was quieter, more thoughtful. A few guests from Noah's side came over to tell me how much they admired Ivy's courage. One woman told me she was a single mother too, and that the moment reminded her why she never stopped fighting for her kids. Even my dad surprised me. He came by as Ivy was licking frosting off her fork. He didn't say much, he never does, but he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "That girl's got her head on straight. That's you." I looked up, shocked. "Thanks, Dad." He gave a short nod and walked away. That one sentence was more validation than I had received from him in years. By the end of the night, people were dancing. Ivy was half asleep in my lap, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind you fake to avoid conflict, but the kind that settles in when you know you stood in your truth. When you realize that being quiet has kept you safe, but it has also kept you small. And that it's okay to take up space, especially when your child is watching. Camille and I didn't talk again that night. She avoided my table, stayed on the dance floor, and smiled for every photo. But I knew what she had seen. She had seen what happens when someone finally stops shrinking. She had seen that the sister she thought was safe to mock had finally drawn a line, and everyone else had seen it too. That night, I didn't need her acceptance. I had something better. I had respect, and I had Ivy. The morning after the wedding, I woke up in my own bed with Ivy curled up beside me. Her hair was tangled, one sock missing, and her arm draped across my stomach like a claim. The light coming in through the window was soft and quiet. I didn't feel heavy like I thought I might. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt clear. That moment from the night before kept replaying in my head. Not Camille's speech, not the laughter, but Ivy's voice, strong, unshaken, certain. I realized that in the middle of a room where I had been made to feel small, Ivy had chosen to stand tall, and she had done it not out of anger, but out of love. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't been coached. She simply saw something wrong and spoke the truth. That truth didn't just silence the room, it healed something inside me that I hadn't even realized was still broken. For years, I had lived with the quiet weight of being the disappointment, the one who didn't finish college on time, the one who got married too young, divorced too soon, and never quite fit the image my mother held on to so tightly. I had measured my life against Camille's and found myself lacking. She had the career, the spotlight, the approval. I had the leftovers. But after that night, I stopped seeing my life as what I didn't have and started seeing it for what it really was. I was raising a child who was kind, brave, and emotionally intelligent. I was working, studying, building something slowly but steadily. I was tired, yes, but I was never broken, just underestimated. A few days after the wedding, I got a message from Camille. It wasn't an apology. It was short. She wrote, "Didn't mean to upset you. Hope Ivy is doing well." I read it twice and left it unanswered. Not out of bitterness, but because there was nothing left to say. She had shown me exactly who she was, and I had finally stopped asking her to be someone else. My mother, surprisingly, didn't bring it up. When we visited her the next weekend, she talked about the wedding like it had gone exactly as planned. She showed Ivy a new dress she had bought for her and made spaghetti with too much oregano, like she always does. At one point, while Ivy played with a toy on the floor, Gloria sat beside me on the couch and said, "She really loves you, that girl." I turned to her, not expecting anything more, but she added, "You're doing a good job." It was the closest thing to a compliment I had received from her in years. I held on to it, not because I needed it to define me, but because it meant she had noticed. After that, I started seeing my life with different eyes. I stopped minimizing myself in conversations. I stopped apologizing when people asked if I was married. I stopped avoiding family gatherings out of fear of judgment. Ivy had already shown me I was worth standing up for. Now it was my turn to live like I believed it. One evening, about 2 weeks later, Ivy and I were sitting on the floor of our living room putting together a puzzle we'd started 3 nights earlier. She placed a piece, clapped her hands, and said, "We're good at this." I looked at her and smiled. "We are." She didn't mean just the puzzle. She meant us, our life, our rhythm, our bond. We were good at this, even without the picture-perfect frame, especially without it. I shared the story on a parenting forum the next day, not expecting much, but it resonated. Comments poured in from single parents, daughters, sons, even married women who had once been the black sheep in their families. People said they cried, that they saw themselves in my story, that Ivy reminded them of the courage they forgot they had. That story became something bigger than me. It reminded me how powerful honesty is, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when it challenges the comfortable lie that success always looks like a white dress, a full guest list, and a perfect speech. My daughter spoke up, not because she needed validation, but because she couldn't bear to let something unfair slide past her. She didn't just defend me, she redefined what strength looks like. People like to talk about legacies in weddings, names changing, new families forming, generations continuing. But that night, my legacy stood on a chair in patent leather shoes and said exactly what needed to be said, and she said it with love. That's the legacy I'm proud of. That's the life I built. Not lonely, not broken, just real. And that's more than enough. So if you've ever felt dismissed, if you've ever sat quietly while someone tried to define you with a joke, a label, or a sideways comment, just remember this. You don't need to explain your worth to people who aren't trying to understand it. And sometimes, the loudest truth doesn't come from you. Sometimes it comes from someone who has watched you rise again and again and simply refuses to let you be overlooked one more time. That night, my daughter reminded me who I am, and maybe, in some small way, she reminded you too. If this story moved you, or made you think of someone you love, do me a favor. Like the video, share it with a friend and leave a comment telling me what part hit home for you. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, and honest, subscribe to the channel. We're building something here, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.